Algebra 2 class. So let's take a look at the 4.2 note, solving equations with square roots or squares. So the question becomes, all right, what are square root equations and what are square equations? So square root equations are any equations that has a square root in it. Okay. So some examples that you'll see is like the square root of x equals 5. Square root of x minus 2 equals 6. 3 times the square root of x plus 5 minus 4 equals 9 are many different examples of square root equations. Notice how it has this symbol right here, the square root. Now, the other type of equations we're going to talk about here today are the square equations. So, a square equation is any equation that has a x squared in it. So as simple as x squared equals 9, or 2x squared plus 3 equals 8, or maybe something like x squared minus 5x plus 3 equals 0. Those are all square equations. This one here, however, just to let you know, is something that we'll talk about a lot more in Chapter 7 because it's more of a specific quadratic equation. So, how do we solve equations? Well, we've been doing this already a little bit in the last lesson, especially those last two challenge problems. We were trying to get x by itself. And that's your goal. Goal is to get x by itself. You have to perform inverse operations. So you guys have already been doing that with some of the basics. Adding and subtracting undo each other. So when you have to get rid of an addition, you subtract. When you have to get rid of a subtraction, you add. Just like multiplication and division undo each other. So what's neat is the square root and squaring undo each other. Now there is one thing that you do want to make sure you are aware about, though, when doing this property. When you square root, you have to put the plus minus sign in front. The reason for that is because when you square a negative number, it becomes actually positive. So when we look at a simple problem like this, x squared equals 9, and I square root both sides, most students will say, well, the square root of 9 is just simply 3, but technically, negative 3 also works. Just to show you that, 3 squared is 9, and negative 3, my apologies, in order to do this, you have to put the negative 3 in parentheses, and you also get 9. On the calculator, that's kind of a little tricky part, is you got to use parentheses when squaring a negative number. All right, so let's talk about specifically how we go about solving square root equations and what those problems look like. So, notice how in the directions it says, using inverse operations, solve the following square root equations. Make sure to check your answer in the end. All right, so if I look here, the square root piece is all by itself. That's kind of the first thing, is you want to get it all by itself if it's not. When it is, to undo that square root, we simply square both sides. So the square and square root cancel each other out. So I'm left with 2x plus 3 equals 5 squared is 25. Now I continue my inverse operations. To undo addition, I subtract. So I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides. So I'm left with 2x equals 25 minus 3 is 22. To Undo multiplication. Now I divide. Divide by 2. 22 divided by 2 is 11. Now, at the very end, what I like to do is check my answers. So I go square root 2 times 11 plus 3. When I hit enter here, it better equal 5. And it does. Once I know that that's the case, I know my answer is right. That's one of the things I love about these problems, is if you check every single one of your answers, you know if it's right or not. So if it's wrong, go back and see if there was some simple math mistake that you might have made. I make them all the time. All right, so let's do the next one. So notice how here you have this plus 4 in front of the square root of x plus 3. We have to get rid of that first. So I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides. So I have the square root of x plus 3 equals 9. Now, just like I did the other problem, I can square both sides. Square and square root cancel out. So I'm going to move it up over here since I got a little more space. So I have x plus 3. 9 being squared is 81. Now to undo addition, I subtract. And I get x equals 81 minus 3 is 78. So now again, I'm going to just do another quick check. So I go square root. My answer was 78 plus 3. Okay, I'm going to move that cursor out so I'm no longer under plus 4 on the outside. So when I hit enter here, I better get 13. And look at that. Mr. Bartz is 2 for 2 today. All right, so let's hope he can continue that streak. Just going to move this up a little bit just because it's easier for Mr. Bartz to write them. All right, the next one. Looks like we got a bunch of steps to do. I have multiplication and subtraction on the outside. So when I undo operations, I do kind of the reverse of PEMDAS. So I always deal with adding and subtracting first. So I'm going to add 5 to both sides. So if I add 5 to both sides, I see kind of a little mistake on this one, but that's okay. So I have 3 square root x plus 4 equals 25. Just to let you know, in the notes, the 3 actually isn't there, so I'm going to cross that out there. So in the note packet, just to let you know, that 3 is actually being removed. Otherwise, this thing isn't going to work out so nice. Okay? So now, I square both sides. I have x plus 4 equals 25 squared. Wow, that's a big number. 25 being squared is 625. Subtract 4, and I get x equals 621. Wow, that doesn't seem right, but let's check. So if I go square root of 621 plus 4, and then outside the parentheses, minus 5, does that equal 20? And sure enough, it does. All right, let's look at the last one here. Square root of 3x minus 2 equals negative 4. So logic tells me, all right, I'm going to square both sides. So I have 3x minus 2 equals 16. So now I add 2. So I get 3x equals 18. Divide by 3, x equals 6. So now when I plug that in there, square root of 3 times 6 minus 2, all under the radical, equals 4. But it's supposed to equal negative 4. Well, if I think about this, can a square root ever equal a negative number? No, it actually can't. Every time you take a square root of something, it's always got to be positive. So this gives us a bad solution. The key thing here is sometimes when you do square roots, if you see, that it equals a negative number, you should really be saying no solution. The reason for it is because a square root cannot equal a negative number. All right, so if you actually go to the next page of the notes, I actually want to just go to the bottom very briefly here because it says for square root equations, we can have blank solutions. And there actually should be an S on the S of this. Okay? So if I look at it, that last problem, I had no solutions. So in essence, that's 0 solutions. The other 3 problems had 1 solution. So when you do square root equations, just note that you might only have, okay, or you will only have 0 or 1 solution. All right, let's take a look at square equations. Okay. So again, we're going to use inverse operations to solve the following square equations. Make sure you check your answers at the end. So now, remember when doing these problems, when we get rid of the square and we use the square root, you got to remember the plus or minus. So like on this first one, I want to get rid of the square right away. It's isolated. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides plus or minus. So when I do that, the square and the square root cancel. So I'm just left with x minus 4. It equals the square root of 25. Many of you probably already know that, but square root of 25 is 5. But it can equal plus or minus 5. So what happens here is I'm going to have to actually write 2 equations. So I'm going to have to write x minus 4 equals 5, or x minus 4 could equal negative 5. So now I solve each equation separately. So here, add 4 to both sides. So x could equal 9, or when I add 4 to both sides, x could equal negative 1. So what happens here is we actually get 2 solutions. So I can check it by simply plugging it back in. So one of my answers was 9. 9 minus 4 quantity squared, sure enough, does equal 25. Check the other one. Negative 1 minus 4 quantity squared. Notice how that also equals 25. So both answers actually work. So with squares, we can actually have 2 solutions. Okay? All right, so let's take a look at the next one, see if we get 2 solutions. So again, I'm going to add 2 to both sides because I want to get the square piece by itself. So I get 16. 14 plus 2 is 16. Now I can square root. Square root, don't forget it's plus or minus. So I have x plus 3 equals square root of 16. Many of you already know that as 4. So I have plus or minus 4. So now I'm going to write 2 equations. I apologize that I didn't do the arrow on that one, but that's all right. X plus 3 equals 4 is the first one. X minus 3 equals 4 is the second one. So to solve this one, I'm going to subtract 3. So x equals 1, or, sorry, here, and then I subtract 3 here. This should have been minus 4. I kind of almost miswrote that. I have my signs mixed up there. Okay. And I get x equals negative 4 and negative 3 make negative 7. All right, let's hope Mr. Barnes didn't make any mistakes. That's why checking helps a lot. So I'm going to check the first one, which is 1 plus 3 quantity squared, okay, minus 2. So when I hit enter here, I better get 14. The other answer was negative 7 plus 3 squared minus 2. Does that equal 14? Absolutely. Whew. Mr. Bart's got a couple of them right. All right, let's take a look at the next one. All right, the next one, x minus 7 quantity squared plus 3 equals 2. So I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides. So I get x minus 7 quantity squared equals negative 1. So now I square root, plus minus, plus minus. So I have x minus 7 equals, well, when I go square root, square root of negative 1. Watch what happens. Whoa, I hit 2 negatives. Helps if I do it right. Wow, Mr. Bartz, it's not taking some of your keystrokes here today. So, look at what happens. Ooh, error. You can't square root, okay? So this is, basically no solution because you cannot square root a negative number. Okay? So wow, we've had 2 solutions and no solutions. All right, let's look at the next one. Oh my goodness, that next one looks complicated. But just break it down, do step by step. So the first thing says, all right, subtract 13 from both sides. So I have 4. X minus 8 quantity squared equals 157 minus 13, I believe, is 144. Then divide both sides by 4. So I have x minus 8 quantity squared equals, just do a quick check, 144 divided by 4, I believe is 36. Sorry, I had a little hiccup there. So now, square root, plus minus, x minus 8 equals plus or minus the square root of 36. Should be 6, so I have plus or minus 6. So now I have to write 2 equations. X minus 8 equals 6, or x minus 8 equals negative 6. So I'm kind of squeezing it there. So now I'm going to add 8 to both sides. So x equals 14, or add 8 to both sides, x equals 2. We've got 2 solutions again. So let's do a check. 4 parentheses, 14 minus 8, close parentheses, squared, plus 13. So when I hit enter, better be 157. That's a good sign. Second one is 4, and then it's 2 minus 8 quantity squared plus 13. Look at that. We got that one right. All right, let's take a look at the last one here. So on the last one here, it says x minus 3 quantity squared equals 0. So I'm going to square root both sides right away. So x minus 3 equals, well, the square root of 0 is just 0. Want to check that out? 0, still 0. So now all I have to do, I don't have a plus minus 0 is still 0. So now I just add 3, so I get x equals just 3. So there I only had one solution. So hopefully what I notice here is, when I'm dealing with square equations, I can have 0 solutions, 1 solution, or 2 solutions. All right, that takes care of the notes, okay, for 4.2. Go ahead and start working on your 4.2 assignment.